Hi everyone, welcome to the DIVA-for-Rhino video tutorials. This is Kara, and in this tutorial we're going to go through how to set up your Rhino model for analysis using the DIVA toolbar. And for this tutorial I'm going to be using a Rhino model that's available on our website called GUND 111, and if you'd like to follow along using that model, go to the website DIVA-for-Rhino.com and go over to the right side where there's the user guide and click Getting Started and Your First Simulation. And when you get to that page, you'll see in the first paragraph there is a little link that says that you can download the Rhino model. And so go ahead and click on that and download the GUND model to your computer. Once you have the model, go ahead and open it, and what we have is a building and a room within that building that we've modeled in greater detail, so that's the one we'll be analyzing. We have a building adjacent to it, and we have a ground plane. It's important whenever you're modeling geometry for analysis with DIVA daylighting that you include a ground plane. And it's also important that you don't have sort of coincident or coplanar planes. And in order to prevent the ground from being coplanar with our floor, we've cut out the base of each of the buildings from the ground plane. You can also just offset it a couple feet so that they're not touching. But it's important to have a ground plane always in your model when you're doing daylight analysis. So one thing in addition to the ground plane that we'll notice about geometry modeled for daylighting is that glazing should be modeled as a single surface, not as a solid or a poly surface. And that's important to remember. Now if we go to our top view here, I'm going to zoom out so it makes sense. We'll see that our building has an orientation, and the way that you should set up your building for analysis with DIVA is that north should be aligned with the y-axis in top view, so it should be pointing towards the top of your screen. So if you need to, when you're working on your own projects, rotate the building so that it has that relationship to the y-axis. And that's it for the most part. The one other thing I'll note, and we'll get into this in more detail later, is that we've organized our geometry basically according to materials. And this is important because later we'll assign materials based on layer conventions. So make sure that if you are, or when you are modeling your own geometry, that you separate out your geometry onto layers that can be identified or associated with distinct materials. Okay, we're ready to get started. So the first thing we're going to do is click on the location button, which is the first DIVA toolbar button. And this will bring up a selection of weather data files. Many of these US locations have been preloaded for you when you install DIVA. And in this case we're going to select the USA Boston file. And I'm sure you're wondering at this point, well, what if one day I do a project that's not located in one of those locations? And that's of course a fair question. And what you would do in that case is you would go to the internet and either Google Energy Plus weather data or keep this link, and from there you can go to this page where actually you see links to many other continents and regions where you can download a variety of weather data files. When you download one of those files, you need to place it in the correct folder so that DIVA can see it. So when you've downloaded the file, go to your C drive and the DIVA folder, and you'll see a weather data folder within that. go ahead and paste your weather file in here, and it will probably be zipped. So make sure to both unzip it and copy the files out of the folder and put them directly in here so that they look like this. And then the next time that you use the location button, your new weather file will show up. The other thing to note is when we press the location button, several default DIVA layers were created. They're in two groups. One is the DIVA analysis surfaces, which is for daylighting, and the other is the DIVA thermal. We're not going to be doing any thermal analysis right now, so we're just going to minimize that. And you'll note there are 5 other layers under here, and these will become, they're somewhat self-explanatory, but the ones that are not will become more obvious as we go forward. Okay, so now that we have set up our geographic location, the next thing we want to do is set up our calculation grid. And for this model, we're interested in finding out light levels about at desk height, since this is a classroom. And so we're going to set up a horizontal calculation grid. So to do so, we'll click on the Nodes button, and it asks us to pick one or more planar surfaces which will be subdivided for analysis. So we're going to go ahead and pick the floor and press enter. And it asks us the distance off of the surface. And as I said, we want it at desk height, which is about 30 inches. We'll press enter to that. And then we want the basic square edge length, which is the distance between nodes. There's some approximation here, just usually because the drive surfaces are not completely square. But basically, you're entering an estimate here. And 15 is fine. The default number here is always expressed in whatever units your Rhino model is set to. So it'll change depending on your units. And the default's obviously only suggestion. But we'll click enter to accept the 15. Now I can see that something happened, but it seems a little strange. And sure enough, when we look at it, we can see that our, especially if I put it in shaded view, we can see that our nodes have been created, but they've been created underneath our surface. And what we really want is them to be created inside our building above the surface. The reason this is happening is that when we created our surface, our floor surface, we had the normal turned pointing down. And so if you find yourself in this situation, all you have to do is type dir in the command line in Rhino, look at where the way that the normals are pointed, and click on the surface to reverse the normals, and press enter to conclude the command. Now to erase those nodes and replace them with new ones, all we have to do is do the command or press the button again. It'll ask us whether we want to delete the nodes. We'll press enter to accept the default answer, and then it will ask us to go ahead and repeat the process. So I'll do that, accept the defaults. And we can see now that our nodes are created where they should be, above the surface there. Okay. So one other thing to note is, let's say you wanted to do to test only a part of your floor surface. So you had geometry that represented, let's say you were doing an office building and you had a large floor plate that your floor geometry existed on, but you really only wanted to test a particular part of that geometry. What you can do then is put the drive surface for your nodes on the test surfaces layer. So if I make that layer active and I go ahead and I draw a rectangle, it's a little off because our orientation is off. But what this allows us to do then is, if we press nodes again, it'll ask us to delete. We can say yes, and we can select this surface now and accept the defaults, and it will create nodes just on that surface. It will also not count that surface in any of the calculations. So in essence, the surface is invisible to the calculations. So this is really useful if your geometry doesn't necessarily relate to your node grid, or the node grid that you want to test. So I'll pause for a second and regenerate the proper node grid. Okay, so now we have our nodes, and the next thing we want to do is associate our materials with our layers, which I alluded to before. So if you click on the materials button and click this first assign materials button here, this will bring up the DIVA menu for daylighting materials. And since that's what we are dealing with right now, we'll ignore the thermal materials tab and just look at the daylighting materials. So on the left-hand side, you see all of our layers listed that are not the DIVA layers are automatically excluded. And on the right-hand side, you can see that each one has a pull-down menu. And in that pull-down menu are a number of choices of materials that have also been preloaded for you. And you can pick from them the material that you want to use. If you're following along, just look at the materials that I've already established here and select the same ones for yourself. If you want to know how to modify these materials, there's information about that in the user guide. Once we've done that, we'll click Submit Material Information. And that's it. We've set up our model and we are ready to run the metrics. And so in the next tutorial, I'll go through running our basic daylighting metrics, which will include running a quick visualization and some of the basic grid-based analysis.